Alright. I know it's been a little bit since I've actually posted a video after I got, the entertainment junction stuff. So, I picked up a book, and I thought it was interesting. So, I know I didn't finish South of the Pump House, because there were some chapters in that were a little sexual. I didn't feel like reading that. So I did that short. This book might not be any better, but I felt like getting it. I will be reading through Cormac Mccarthys' Blood Meridian. So let's not delay any further. I think I should say I'm not good at reading things like this because of dyslexia. So have fun hearing me stutter. Chapter 1. Childhood in Tennessee runs away. New Orleans fights. Is shot to Galveston. I don't have to read all that. It's like the chapter name. See the child? He is pale and thin. He wears a thin and ragged linen shirt. He stokes the scullery fire. Outside lie dark, turned fields with rags of snow and darker woods that harbor yet a few last wolves. His folk are known for hews of wood and drawers of water, but in truth his father has been a schoolmaster. He lies in drink. He quotes from poets whose names are now lost. The boy crouches by the fire and watches him. Night of your birth, 33. The Leonids. They were called God. How the stars did fall. I looked for blackness, holes in heaven. The dipper stove. The mother dead, these 14 years did incubate in her own bosom. The creature who would carry her off, the father never speaks her name. The child does not know it. He has a sister in this world that he will not see again. He watches, pale and unwashed. He can neither read nor write, and in him broods already a taste for mindless violence. All history present in that visage, the child, the father of the man. At 14, he runs away. He will not see again the freezing kitchen house in the prudent darkness. No, pre-dawn dark. The firewood, the washpots. He wanders west as far as Memphis, a solitary migrant upon that flat and pastoral landscape. Blacks in the fields, lank and stooped, their fingers spider-like among the bolls of cotton. A shadowed agony in the garden against the sun's declining figures, moving in the shadow. Figures moving in the slower dusk across a paper skyline. A lone, dark husbandman pursuing mule and harrow down the rain-blown bottomland toward night. A year later, he is in St. Louis. He is taken on for New Orleans, abroad, a flatboat. 42 days on the river at night, the steamboats Hoot and Trudge passed through the black waters. All alight, like cities adrift, they break up with the float and sell the lumber and he walks in the streets and hears tongues he has not heard before. He lives in a room above a courtyard behind the tavern, and he comes down at night like some fairy-book beast to fight with the sailors. He is not big, but he has big wrists, big hands. His shoulders are set close. The child's face is curiously untouched. Behind the scars, the eyes oddly innocent. They fight with fists, with feet, with bottles or knives, all races, all breeds, men whose speech sounds like grunting of apes, men from lands so far and queer that standing over them where they lie, bleeding in the mud, feels mankind itself vindicted. On a certain night, a Maltese boatswain shoots. Shoots him in the back with a small pistol, swinging to deal with the man. He is shot again, just below the heart. The man flees and leans against the bar with blood running down his shirt. The others look away after a while. He sits on the floor. He lies in a cot in a room upstairs for 2 weeks while the tavern keeper's wife attends him. She brings his meals, she carries out his slops, a hard-looking woman with a wiry body like a man's. By the time he is mended, he has no memory to pay her, and he leaves in the night and sleeps on the riverbank until he can find a boat that will take him on. The boat is going to Texas. Only now is the child finally divested of all that he has been. His origins are become remote as his identity, and not again in all the world's turning will there be terrain so wild and barest to try whether the stuff of creation may be shaped to man's will, or whether his own heart is not another kind of clay. The passengers are different. The passengers are a different lot. They cage their eyes, and no man asks another what is it that brings him there. He sleeps on the deck, a pilgrim among others. He watches the dim shore rise and fall. Gray seabirds gawking, flights of pelicans coastwise above the gray swells. They disembark abroad at lighter settlers with their chattels, all studying the low coastline and the thin bite of sand. Scrub, pine swimming in the haze. He walks through narrow streets of the port. The air smells of salt and Newswind lumber at night. Whores call to him from the dark like souls in want. A week, and he is on the move again. A few dollars in his purse that he's earned walking the sand. Roads of the southern night alone. His hands balled in the cotton pockets of his cheap coat. Earthen causeways across the marshland. Egrets in their rookeries, white as candles among the mossland. Among the moss, the wind has a raw edge to it, and leaves hope by the roadside, and skelter on the night fields. He moves north through small settlements and farms, working for day wages, and he sees a parricide hanged in the crossroads hamlet, and the man's friend runs forward and pulls his legs. He hangs dead from his rope while urine darkens his trousers. He works in a sawmill. He works in the diphtheria pest house. He takes as pay from a farmer an aged mule and a back this animal in the spring of the year 1849. He rides up through the latter day Republic of Fredonia into the town of Nacogdoches. The Reverend Green had been playing to a full house daily as long as the rain had been falling, and the rain had been falling for. The rain had been falling for 2 weeks when the kid ducked into the ratty canvas tent. There was standing room along the walls, a place or two, and such a heady reek of wet and bathless that they themselves would sally forth unto the downpour, now and again for fresh air before the rain drove them in again. He stood with others of his kind along the back wall. The only thing that might have distinguished him in the crowd was that he was not armed. Neighbors said the Reverend he couldn't stay out of these here hell holes right here in Nacogdoches. I said to him, "You gonna take the Son of God in there with ye?" And he said, "Oh, no, I ain't." And I said, "Don't you know that he said, I will follow ye always, even unto the end of the road?" "Well," he said, "I ain't asking nobody to go nowhere." And I said, "Neighbor, you don't need to ask. He's going to be there with you every step of the way, whether you ask or you don't." I said, "Neighbor, you can't get shed of him. You can't get shed of him. Now, are you going to drag him? Are you going to drag him into that hellhole yonder? You ever see such a place for rain?" The kid had been watching the Reverend. He turned to the man who spoke. He wore long mustaches after the fashion of teamsters, and he wore a wide-brim hat with a low, round crown. He was slightly wild-eyed, and he was watching the kid earnestly, as if he'd known his opinion of the rain. "I just got here," said the kid. "Well, it beats all I've ever seen," the kid nodded. An enormous man, dressed in oilcloth slicker, had entered the tent, removed his hat. He was bald as stone. He had no trace of beard, had no brows to his eyes, nor lashes to them. He was close on the 7 feet in height, and he stood smoking a cigar, even in the nomadic house of God, and he seemed to have removed his hat only to chase the rain from it, for now he put it on again. The Reverend had stopped his sermon altogether. There was no sound in the tent. All watched the man. He adjusted his hat. And then pushed his way forward as far as the cateboard pulpit where the Reverend stood, and there he turned to address the Reverend's congregation. His face was serene and strangely childlike. His hands were small. He held them out. "Ladies and gentlemen, I feel it my duty to inform you that the man holding this revival is an impostor. He holds no papers of divinity from any institution, recognized or improvised. He is altogether devoid of the least qualification to the office he has usurped, and is only committed to memory a few passages from the good book for the purpose of lending to his fraudulent sermons some faint flavor of the pity he despises. In truth, the gentleman standing here before you poses as a minister of the Lord. Is not only totally illiterate, but is also wanted by the law in the states of Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, Arkansas. "Oh God," cried the Reverend. "Lies! Lies!" He began reading feverishly from his opened Bible on the variety of charges, the most recent of which involved a girl of 11 years. I said 11. Who had come to him in trust, and whom he was surprised in the act of violating while actually clothed in the livery of God. A moan swept through the crowd. A lady sank to her knees. "This is him," cried the Reverend, sobbing. "This is him, the devil. Here he stands. Let's hang the turd," called an ugly thug from the gallery to the rear. Not 3 weeks before this, he was run out of Fort Smith, Arkansas, for having congress with a goat. Yes, lady, that is what I said. Goat. "Why, dab my eyes if I won't shoot the son of a bitch," said the man, rising at the far side of the tent and drawing a pistol from his boot. He leveled it and fired. The young teamsters instantly produced a knife from his clothing and unseamed the tent and stepped outside into the rain. The kid followed. They ducked low and ran across the mud. Toward the hotel, already gunfire was general within the tent, and a dozen exists had been hacked through the canvas walls, and people were pouring out, women screaming, folk stumbling, folk trampled underfoot in the mud. The kid and his friend reached the hotel gallery and wiped the water from their eyes and turned to watch as they did. So the tent began to sway and buckle, and like a huge wounded Medusa, it slowly settled to the ground, trailing tattered canvas walls and ratty guy ropes over the ground. The bald-headed man was already at the bar when they entered. On the polished wood before him were 2 hats and a double handful of coins. He raised his glass, but not to them. They stood up to the bar and ordered whiskeys, and the kid laid his money down, but the barman pushed it back with his thumb and nodded. "These here? It's on the judge," he said. They drank. The seamster set his glass down and looked at the kid, or he seemed to you. You couldn't be sure of his gaze. The kid looked down. The bar to where the judge stood. The bar was that hall. Not every man could even get his elbows up on it, but it came just to the judge's waist, and he stood with his hands placed flatwise on the wood, leaning slightly as if about to give another address. By now, men were piling through the doorway, bleeding, covered in mud, cursing. They gathered about the judge. A posse was being drawn to pursue the preacher. Judge: "How did you come to have the goods on that no account?" "Goods?" said the judge. "When was you in Fort Smith?" "Fort Smith? Where did you know him to know all that stuff on him? You mean the Reverend Green?" You mean the Reverend Green? Yes, sir. I reckon that was you in Fort Smith, for ye come out here. They looked from one to another. Well, where was it you run upon him? I never laid eyes on the man before today, never even heard of him. He raised his glass and drank. There was a strange silence in the room. The man looked like mud effigies. Finally, someone began to laugh. But another soon, they were all laughing together. Someone bought the judge a drink. It had been raining for 16 days when he met Toadvine, and it was raining yet. He was still standing in the same saloon. He had drunk up all his money, save $2. The teamster had gone. The room was all but empty. The door stood open, and you could see the rain falling in the empty lot behind the hotel. He drained his glass and went out. There were boards laid across the mud, and he followed the paling band, the door light down toward the backboard. Down the backboard, Jake's at the bottom of the lot. Another man was coming from the Jakes, and they met halfway on the narrow planks. The man before him swayed slightly. His wet hat brim fell to his shoulders, save in the front where it was pinned back. He held a bottle loosely in one hand. "You better get out of my way," he said. The kid wasn't going to do that, and he saw no use in discussing it. He kicked the man in the jaw. The man went down and got up again. He said, "I'm gonna kill you." He swung with a bottle, and the kid ducked and swung again, and the kid stepped back, and the kid hit the man again, shattered the bottle against the side of his head. He went off the boards into the mud, and the man lunged after him with the jagged bottleneck and tried to stick it in his eye. The kid was fending with his hands, and they were slick with blood. He kept trying to reach for his boot, his knife. "Kill your ass," the man said. They slogged about in the dark of the lot, coming out of their boots. The kid had his knife now, and they circled crabwise. When the man lurched at him, cut the man's shirt open. The man threw down the bottleneck and unsheathed an immense bowie knife from behind his neck. His hat had come off, and his black and ropey locks swung about his head, and he had codified his threats to one word: "Kill," like a crazed chant. That'n's cut," said several men standing along the walkway watching. "Kill! Kill!" slobbered the man, wading forward, but someone else was coming down the lot. Great steady sucking sounds like a cow. He was carrying a huge shillelagh and reached the kid first, and when he swung with the club, the kid went face down in the mud. He'd have died if someone hadn't turned him over. When he woke, it was daylight, and the rain had stopped. He was looking up in the face of a man, long hair, who was completely covered in mud. The man was saying something with him. "What?" said the kid. I said, "Are you quits?" "Quits?" "Quits, 'cause if you want some more of me, sure as hell gonna get it." He looked at the sky, very high, very small, a buzzard. He looked at the man. "Is my neck broke?" he said. The man looked over the lot and spat and looked at the boy again. "Can you not get up?" "I don't know. I ain't tried. I never meant to break your neck, no. I meant to kill you." "They ain't nobody done it yet." He clawed at the mud and pushed himself up. The man was sitting on the planks with his boots alongside him. "There ain't nothing wrong with you," he said. kid looked about stiffly at the day. "Where's my boots?" he said. The man squinted at him. Flakes of dried mud fell from his face. "I'm going to kill you, son of a bitch. They get my. I'm going to kill some son of a bitch if they got my boots." Or I think that's the kid. I think that's the kid speaking. I have to redo that actually. "I'm going to kill some son of a bitch if they got my boots." Yonder looks like one of them. The kid labored off. The mud fetched up one boot. He slogged about in the yard, feeling likely lumps of mud. "This your knife?" he said. The man squinted at him. "Looks like it." "Looks like it," he said. The kid pitched it to him. He bent and picked it up and wiped a huge blade from his trouser leg. "Thought somebody done stole you," he told the knife. "Thought somebody done stole you," he told the knife. The kid found his other boot and came up and sat on the boards. His hands were huge with mud, and he wiped one of them briefly at his knees, and he let it fall again. They sat there, side to side, looking across the barren lot. There was a picket fence at the edge of the lot, and beyond the fence a boy was drawing water at a well, and there were chickens in the yard. A man came from the dram shop door down the walk toward the outhouse. He stopped where they sat and looked at them. Then he stopped off into the mud. After a while, he came back and stepped up. I read that wrong. Whoopsies. Stepped off into the mud. After a while, he came back and stepped off into the mud again and went around and looked up on the walk. The kid looked at the man. His head was strangely narrow, and his hair was plastered with mud in a bizarre and primitive coiffure. On his forehead were burned the letters H.T., and the lower, almost between his eyes, the letter F. And these markings were splayed and garish, as if the iron had been left too long. When he turned to look at the kid could see that he had no ears. He stood up and sheathed the knife and started to walk. With the boots in his hand, the kid rose and followed halfway by the hotel. The man stopped and looked out at the mud. How much longer is this chapter? Gotcha, not much longer. And then sat down on the planks and pulled on the boots, mud and all. Then he rose and slogged off through the lot to pick something up. "I want you to look here," he said, "at my goddamned hat. You couldn't tell what it was. Something dead." He flapped it around and pulled it over his head and went. The kid followed. The dram house was a long, narrow hall, wainscoted with varnished boards. There were tables by the wall, spittoons on the floor. There were no patrons. The barman looked up when they entered. "Whoa!" I can't say that word. For clarification, it says the hard R. Ooh. Well, spittoons on the floor. There were no patrons. The barman looked up when they entered, and the hard R that had been sweeping the floor stood the broom against the wall and went, "Where's Sidney?" said the man in his suit of mud. "In the bed, I reckon. They went on. Toadvine," called the barman. The kid looked back. The barman had come from behind the bar and was looking after them. They crossed from the door through the lobby, the hotel, toward the stairs, leaving varied forms of mud behind them on the floor. As they started up the stairs, and the clerk at the desk leaned and and called to them. Toadvine. He stopped and looked back, not black. He'll shoot you, Old Sydney. Old Sydney. They went up the stairs, and at the top of the stairs landing, at the top of the landing was a long hall with a window light at the end. There were varnished doors down the halls, set so close they might have been closets. Toadvine went on until he came up to the end of the hall. He listened at the end. He listened at the last door, and he eyed the kid. You got a match? The kid searched in his pockets and came up with a crushed and stained wooden box. The man took it from him. Need a little tinder here, he said. He was crumbling the box and stacking the bits against the door. He struck a match and set the pieces alight. He pushed a little pile of burning wood under the door and added more matches. Is he in there? Said the boy. That's what we're fixing to see. A dark curl of smoke rose, a blue flame of burning varnish. They squatted in the hallway and watched. Thin flames began to run up over the panels. In the dark, back again. Let me just reread that. Thin flames began to run up and over the panels and dart back again. The watchers looked like forms excavated from a bog. Tap on the door now, said Toadvine. The kid rose. Toadvine stood up and waited. They could hear the flames crackling inside the room. The kid tapped. You better tap louder than that. This man drinks some. He balled his fist and lambasted the door about 5 times. He'll fire, said a voice. Where he comes. Here he comes. They waited. You hot son of a bitch, said the voice. Then the knob turned and the door opened. He stood in his underwear, holding in one hand a towel he used to turn the doorknob with. When he saw them, he turned and started back into the room, but Toadvine seized him by the neck, rode him to the floor, and held him by the hair and began to pry out an eyeball with his thumbs. The man grabbed his wrist and bit it. Kick his mouth in, called Toadvine. Kick it! The kid stepped past them into the room, turned and kicked the man in the face. Toadvine held his head back by the hair. Kick him, he called. Kick him, honey. He kicked. Toadvine pulled the bloody head around and looked at it and let it flop to the floor. He rose and kicked the man himself. 2 spectators were standing in the hallway. The door was completely afire, and the part of the walls and ceilings. They went out and down the hall. The clerk was coming up the steps 2 at a time. Toadvine, you son of a bitch, he said. Toadvine was 4 steps above him, and when he kicked him, he caught him by the throat. The clerk sat down on the stairs. When the kid came past him, he hit him in the side of the head, and the clerk slumped over and began to slide toward the landing. The kid stepped over him and went down the lobby and crossed to the front door and out. Toadvine was running down the street, waving his fist above his head crazily and laughing. He looked like a great clay voodoo doll made animate, and the kid looked like another behind him. Behind these flames were licking at the top corner of the hotel, and clouds of dark smoke rose into the warm Texas morning. He'd left the mule with a Mexican family that boarded animals at the edge of town, and he arrived there wild-looking and out of breath. The women opened the door and looked at him. Need to get my mule, he wheezed. She looked at him some more, and then she called towards the back of the house. He walked around. There were horse teeth tethered Man, I saw it tethered. It was at the end of a sentence, and it said teth. I spelled that as teeth. Oopsies. There were horses tethered in the lot, and there was a flatbed wagon against the fence with some turkeys sitting on the edge, looking out. The old lady had come to the back door. "Nito," she called. "Venga. Hey un calab..." That's Spanish. I cannot say that properly. Hold on. Give me like 1 second to analyze this. Nito, she called. "Venga. Hey un caballero. Aquí venga." He went down the shed, the tack room, and he got his wretched saddle and his blanket roll and brought them back. He found the mule and unstalled it and bridled it with a rawhide hackamore and led it to the fence. He leaned against the animal with his shoulder and got the saddle over it and got it cinched. The mule started starting and shying. I have a lot more complications reading this than I thought it would. The mule, starting and shying and running its head along the fence, he led it across the lot. The mule kept shaking its head sideways as if it had something in its ear. He let it out in the road. As he passed the house, the woman came padding out after him. When she saw him put his foot in the stirrup, she began to run. He swung up into the broken saddle and chucked the mule forward. He stopped at the gate and watched him go. He didn't look back. When he passed back through the town, the hotel was burning, and the men were standing around watching it, some holding empty buckets. A few men sat horseback watching the flames, and one of these was the few men sat horseback watching the flames, and one of these was the judge. As the kid rode past the judge, turned and watched him. He turned the horse as if he'd have an animal watch too. When the kid looked back, the judge smiled. The kid touched up the mule. They went sucking out past the old stone fort along the road west. And that was chapter 1 of Blood Meridian. Ooh, my hair looks terrible today. Jesus. Yeah, I think that's pretty good so far. I mean, no sexual stuff. There was a slur. But, yeah, it's an older book, so... It's an old book about Western, so it's technically historically accurate, so you can't really fault it too much. But yeah, that was the first chapter. I'll probably maybe read some more tomorrow. It's like almost 12 here. I don't know. You have a good day. This is Tony, out.